Welcome to episode 48 of the Construction Leading Edge podcast, brought to you by ConstructionLeadingEdge.com. My name is Todd DeWalt, and my job here is to help you grow your leadership skills, grow your business, and grow your income. Today we're going to tackle a big topic that I hear a lot of people talking about in the construction industry, and that is the issue of a skilled workforce shortage. I talk to a lot of folks on this podcast, people I run into in business, and everywhere I go, I hear the same thing. We don't have enough skilled workers, we don't have enough superintendents, we don't have enough pipe fitters, we're just short on people. Now we're in the spring and summer months, and recently I heard project executive say, hey, we're concerned that in the hot months of summer, there's not going to be enough skilled labor to man these projects. So it's obviously a big deal. CEOs of companies like Randy Hall, David Moody, Will Hodges, folks I've interviewed here on the podcast, all agree that skilled workforce shortage is a big problem that we face short-term and long-term. Now, some of the things people have talked about in the way of addressing this are things like, well, we've got to get into high schools and we've got to teach people, we got to tell these kids and convince them that working with your hands and working with the trades, in the trades, is a great way to earn a living, raise your family. We need to get into elementary schools, convince people that not everybody has to go to college, and I don't disagree. It's important that we get young people to change the way they think about it, but that's not going to help you next month. That's not going to help you in July when you're short on people. So I want to give you a few strategies that I've used successfully, and I know they work. I want to share some strategies that work, and they'll help you in the short term. These are things that you don't have to wait 5 years to see the benefits from. You can put them to work right now, and in a matter of days or weeks, you'll be able to see some benefits. But first, I want to share an example of kind of an analogy of how I think about these strategies and how they work. And I've worked with a lot of electricians, worked with a lot of electrical engineers, and if you've been around building construction or electrical engineering or electrical contracting, you've heard a couple of terms. And one of those terms is something called load shedding. And the definition of load shedding is the deliberate shutdown of parts of an electrical system to prevent failure of an entire system when demand strains the capacity of that system. Let me read that again. So load shedding is when you deliberately shut down parts of a system to prevent failure of an entire system when the demand strains capacity of that system. So here's an example. We're doing a building right now, and it has an emergency backup generator, and there's also a 75 horsepower fire pump in the building. And essentially when the emergency generator kicks on, and if there's a call for the fire pump to kick on, then there's not enough capacity for some other non-life safety equipment. So for example, some non-essential equipment like elevator motors will get load shed so that the fire pump can kick on when the emergency generator is under load. So there's not enough capacity there to handle the fire pump and all the elevators. So in that situation, the system is going to shed the load of the elevators to make sure that when that fire pump motor kicks on, that spike doesn't overload the system and cause problems. Another term that you'll hear in electrical engineering is something called demand side management, or peak demand management. If you've ever operated a big building that had a 480 volt three-phase service, then especially if you've ever paid the bill for one of those buildings, you're going to get, in a lot of parts of the country, you'll get something called a demand charge, and that is the peak demand that was required to support your building at one point in time. So for example, if you had a 100,000 square foot building that had 20 rooftop units on it, and if for 5 minutes of that month 10 of your rooftop units, let's say it was in the summertime, those compressors kicked on at the same time, if they were running at the same time, you would get a pretty significant charge for that particular moment, because utility company has to provide that capacity for your peak demand. So you're paying for peak demand. So that's um, demand side management or peak demand management. So what you do in that case is you make sure that you don't have 10 rooftop units that kick on at the same time. So you can stage your big loads so that they don't come on at the same time, that they're sequenced out. You could sequence out these air handling units using a control system so that one comes on and then 5 minutes later another one comes on, so that they're not all coming on at the same time, or maybe even that they're not running at the same time. So that's load shedding and that's demand side management. So how in the world do those topics apply to you if you're not an electrical engineer? Excellent question. So let's talk about what are some of the things you can do to use this idea of load shedding and demand side management or peak demand management in your business if you're not an electrician. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to eliminate wasted time. Now this sounds really simple, sounds pretty basic, but I see so much wasted time on projects. I've traveled around various job sites. I see different ways contractors operate, different subcontractors operate, and I see so much wasted time. Let me give you some examples. One, phone usage. This is ridiculous. It is ridiculous the amount of time that's lost to phone usage. Two is smoking. I was talking to a project manager, and he was under the gun to get this project delivered, and he said if I could get guys to stop using their phone and stop smoking, then we would be able to get this work done. But literally, these guys and gals were spending probably 25 to 30% at least of their day looking at their phone, Facebook, Instagram, text messaging, talking on the phone on personal phone calls, and or they were outside smoking. So let's talk about phone usage. It is not a requirement for your people to have personal phones on the job site. You are not required to, as far as I know, you're not required to allow them to carry their personal phone. You're not required to pay them to make personal phone calls. While they're on the job site, while they're on the clock, they should be working. If you have a skilled workforce shortage, then you need to make sure that your skilled workforce is actually working while they're on the clock, not talking on the phone, not texting, not checking Facebook. I was on a job site a couple of months ago and I saw these two young people who were installing pipe insulation, and I watched them for 5 minutes or so, and both of them wandered around the job site for 5 minutes with a piece of insulation in one hand, a piece of insulation and a knife in one hand, and looking down at their phone. Now this causes a couple of problems. One, it's a productivity issue. They are doing who knows what on a phone while they're supposed to be working. Two, it's a safety issue. You don't need to have people walking around looking down at their belly button or looking at their phone and not being aware of what's going on around them. So what can you do about this? Well, what I did a few years ago was I implemented a no personal phone policy on job sites. Keep your personal phone in your vehicle, put it in your tool bag, put it in the toolbox, put it in the gang box, but you are not to have a personal phone on you during work time. And you can check it at break, check it at lunch, whatever, but work time is work time. No personal phone usage on the job site. So to deal with the issue of how do you communicate with these people, you can provide a cheap company phone. Use a flip phone. We use I think it was AT&T, and they had what they called a rugby phone, one of the indestructible flip phones, extremely inexpensive. Once you set up a plan, it may cost you $10 to $20 a month to provide your employee with a phone. Now I guarantee that they're wasting a whole lot more than that, a whole lot more than $20 a month looking at personal phones, taking personal phone calls from their wife, their girlfriend, their baby mama, their whatever, texting, looking at who knows what on company time. So that's one thing you could do, is eliminate personal phones on the job site. Buy your people either a company phone, or use a radio, or just cut out all communication. If you don't need to be talking to them necessarily, and they don't need to talk to anybody else, then they don't have to have a phone. Believe it or not, people did construction for hundreds and thousands of years without a cell phone. Smoking. There are companies that prohibit smoking on job sites. They prohibit smoking in company vehicles. they have smoke-free campuses. You would be better off, it would be money and time well spent to pay your folks to fund, if they're your employees, you'd be money ahead to fund the program to help them stop smoking. Just think about the time they spend smoking every day and the impact to their health. It's going to reduce their productivity. It's going to increase their health problems, which is going to increase your health insurance costs as a company. So think about how you address smoking, because again, if you have a skilled workforce shortage, you need to make sure the people you do have are working as productively as possible while they're there. Another thing that wastes a lot of time is moving material around a job site. If you're not sure where material needs to land on a job site, then don't have it delivered. Think about how you are staging your material. Use what people call just-in-time delivery. If you're going to start hanging drywall on Wednesday, have it show up at the end of day Monday. Don't move that stuff around. Fight the urge to buy all the material on the front end, bill for stored material, and then shuffle it around the job site because you don't know where it's going to go. Bring just what you need. Bring it just before you need it. Another big waste of time is rework. This goes without saying, but attack rework. Make sure when your people are working that they have the most up-to-date information. Make sure that they have the up-to-date plans. Make sure they're working where they're supposed to be working. Find the technology that will allow you to look at plans on the job site so you're not messing with rolled up drawings that may be out of date. Another big time waster on job sites is decision making. Your people, your producers in the field should not have to be making decisions. They should not have to be wondering, should we work here? Should we work on the second floor? Should we work on the third floor? Should we work on the north end of the site? Should we work on the south end of the site? That's your job as the leader. So make sure that they know what plan A is, where they're supposed to be working, and make sure that you have also developed a plan B and a plan C in case things fall apart. Because as some military strategist once said, no plan survives attack no plan survives contact with the enemy. Your plan will change, so be ready for it. And lastly, you need to be thinking about, you need to realize that every day is an opportunity to create revenue that you cannot get back. You cannot create another day. If you lose a day or you lose an hour because of wasted time, that hour or that day can never be recaptured. Therefore, you can never make revenue with that time again. So you need to maximize the revenue producing potential of every day that you've got on the job site. That's the way you need to think about time. So we've eliminated the wasted time. Now let's talk about load shedding. Remember the analogy of you've got a building on an emergency generator, you've got a 75 horsepower fire pump that kicks on, you've got this big demand and something has to go away. So some things have to be shed. You have to take load off your resource. So we're going to talk about how do we shed load from your resources. So the first step in doing this, step one in load shedding, is to identify the key revenue producing activities in your operation. One is to identify the key revenue producing activities. What are the things that you're doing that you get paid for? Now, unless you charge by the hour, then chances are your revenue producing activities are something like hanging drywall, painting, running 3/4 inch EMT if you're an electrician, installing plumbing fixtures if you're a plumber, making service calls that you bill out at $85 per service call if you are an HVAC technician, things like that. So identify the key revenue producing activities in your operation. And then secondly is to determine who are the key revenue producers in your operation. So who are the people that are doing the key revenue producing activities? So here's a couple of examples. If you are an earthwork contractor, chances are your equipment operators are your key revenue producers, not the project manager, not the mechanic, not the guy holding the rod for the surveyor, but your equipment operator, the guy that's loading trucks. If you're in mass excavation, the guy loading trucks is probably a key revenue producer. Your pipe layer, could be a key revenue producer if you're on a water line project. Drywall hanger, drywall finishers, the plumber who's making service calls, the guy who's actually doing the work that is getting you paid. And believe it or not, if you work in the office, it's probably not you. If you're a project manager, if you're the executive, you are probably not the key revenue producer in your operation. You're a key part of that system, but you're not the guy or the gal who's putting work in place that you can get money for. So you've identified your key revenue producing activities, you've identified your key revenue producers. Next is to analyze what your key revenue producers are doing every day. Look at their time, look at how they're spending their time, and then ask yourself or ask them. You need to determine, are they making money? Are they being productive doing these things? If not, you need to get it off their plate. So, for example, you need to look at a person's day. Maybe you may just follow them around or ask them, what did you do from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock today? What did you do from 1 to 4 p.m. today? What did you do at the end of the day? Or just flat out ask them, what are you doing that is not productive? What can we take off your plate that's not helping you out at all? So you've analyzed what they're doing. You've got this list of activities that they're doing every day or every week on some routine basis. And then step 4 is to attack that list to shed the load, so to speak, that is preventing them from producing more revenue, preventing them from being more productive. So you're going to take a multi-step approach. First step is to eliminate what can be eliminated, automate what can be automated, and then delegate what can be delegated. So we're going to eliminate or automate or delegate all these things. And the idea is to trim down the list of activities for your key revenue producers to maximize the time that they have available to produce revenue. Okay, so here's a couple of examples. Unless you're a mechanic, servicing equipment is not a key revenue producing activity. So if you run an earthwork operation or a pipelining operation, and let's say you determine that your pipe layer and your equipment operator are the 2 key revenue producers, then neither of those people need to be servicing equipment. They do not need to be changing oil. They don't need to be greasing equipment. They don't need to be fueling trucks. That equipment operator needs to be pulling levers in that machine, and that pipe layer needs to be sticking sticks of pipe together in the ditch. Your key revenue producers need to stay out of supply houses. They need to stay out of Lowe's, stay out of Home Depot. They don't need to be driving around picking up materials. They don't need to be moving equipment from job site to job site or from one place on the job site to another place on the job site. They don't need to be moving materials around. They need to be putting material into place, producing revenue. They don't need to be doing unnecessary paperwork or reporting. So you need to think about what am I asking my people to do, and do I really need that information? Can I get it with a phone call, or do I really need them to fill out a piece of paper or submit some kind of report? I'm speaking of reporting. You need to minimize the amount of time that your revenue producers are spending on reporting. If you're having your people do daily job site inspections or reports or weekly inspections, you need to find an app like one that I recommend that's called ArcaSnapper. It allows you to take quick pictures with your phone, create a report, send it to whomever you want to. Very little time, no paper, no digital camera, no Microsoft Word involved. If you want to find out more about that, go to constructionleadingedge.com/snap, and you'll be able to check out ArcaSnapper. One thing I've seen a lot of is your key people are spending a lot of time tracking time, filling out timesheets, reviewing timesheets for the people that they're supervising, and you need to cut that crap out. They need to absolutely minimize the amount of time that they're spending tracking time. I recommend an app like T-Sheets. It allows people to enter their timesheets on a mobile phone, either via text message, smartphone. It eliminates the paper. It's got some great reporting. It will integrate with your accounting software on the back end. It is tremendous. I used it for several years. It was huge. It's called T-Sheets. Go to constructionleadingedge.com/T-Sheets to find out more about that. Great people, great application. Saved me thousands of dollars every month in tracking time. And then another one to think about is the time that your revenue producers are spending talking either to you, talking to architects, talking to engineers, talking to the general contractor, whatever. You need to shed that load, and if these people are your key revenue producers, then talking to architects, talking to engineers, talking to you is not producing revenue. You need to free them up, let them do their job, and either you leave them alone, you go talk to the architect, you go talk to the engineer, you go talk to the owner, or get your supervisor out there to run interference for those folks so that they can do their job. Some other things you can do, you need to consider is, we talked about eliminating stuff, automating things which would look like using apps like ArchiSnapper or T-Sheets, and then delegating. You need to delegate and shift. If there are things that need to be done and they can't be automated, they can't be eliminated, then you need to delegate them off your key revenue producers. These would be things like moving equipment around, going to the supply house, servicing equipment. You need to consider hiring somebody to go to the supply house, somebody to drive and move equipment around, to go buy parts, to run parts. Consider having your supply house deliver to the job site or deliver to your shop. There are plenty of services out there, especially if you live in a metropolitan area. There are services that you can use to deliver stuff from your shop to the job site, or go pick up from Home Depot and deliver to the job site. So look around, find some delivery services. I'm sure I know in some cities there's the equivalent of Uber for deliveries. People will go buy stuff for you, deliver it for a flat fee, and you might think, oh man, it's going to cost me $25 to have somebody deliver a part. Well, if you send your key revenue producer, if you put your carpenter foreman in a truck and drive him to the supply house and it takes an hour, then I guarantee it's going to cost you more than $25. Because chances are, well, I know that guy's going to cost you more than $25 an hour, and the lost revenue is the biggest thing. You've lost the opportunity to make money with that hour that you can no longer recapture. So that's a huge one. If you want to go deeper into the cost of shopping, the cost of buying material, check out my webinar. I dive a little deeper into that. Go to constructionleadingedge.com/cash flow, and then there's a lot of other stuff in there, but there's a section called Leverage Your Labor Force where I do a deeper dive into the cost of going to the supply house or going to a Home Depot, and you'll be surprised at how much money it's costing you to have your people go shopping. Okay, so that's elimination. We've talked about load shedding. Now let's talk about demand management. Remember the analogy of the 100,000 square foot building with a whole bunch of rooftop units. Think about, now that you've figured out who your key revenue producers are, you may realize, all right, I've got 3 or 4 crews here, and I've got 3 or 4 different key activities. And maybe it's, if you're a drywall contractor, for example, you'll say that, well, my metal stud framing is a key operation, my drywall hanging is a key operation, and drywall finishing is a key operation. And then everything else kind of goes into supporting those key operations. Well, what you need to do, well, you need to think about these resources, these crews. They are a fixed resource, and you have what may appear to be more demand than your resources can possibly cover. You have multiple projects at different job sites, and you're trying to sequence things around. Well, you need to put yourself in the driver's seat and stage your various crews to work as efficiently as possible, to move from task to task or from project to project with as little downtime as possible to maximize their revenue producing potential. So again, you need to stage your project demands so that the key producers move from task to task or from project to project with as little downtime as possible. So what does that look like? Let me give you an example. This is something that I spent spent some time in the real world actually doing. I was running a company. We did municipal sewer line rehabilitation and repair. That meant we went out into city streets and neighborhoods and we repaired sewer lines. So we did a variety of things, but let me give you an example of a before and after. What it looked like before, and then what it looked like after I implemented some of these elimination and load shedding and demand management strategies to the workforce. So here's before. This was a crew, or one operation. We had multiple crews that did this, but one operation was to dig and replace sewer lines in the street. So this would be dig up an old 8-inch clay line, several hundred feet, manhole to manhole, in the middle of a neighborhood, could be in a downtown metropolitan street, and then do all the restoration, put it all back in place, and go away. So before, the dig crew, which consisted of an equipment operator, a couple of truck drivers, a couple of laborers, and a foreman, they did everything. They were a turnkey operation, so that meant in the mornings they would, on a typical day, they would show up at the shop, they would go find the equipment that they needed, they would load up the equipment, they would go into the storage trailers, they would find the parts that they needed, whatever parts they didn't have that they needed, they would all go to the supply house, or whoever was in the truck with the guy that was who knew what to get. 2 or 3 guys would go to the supply house, go buy parts and fittings, etc. They would go to the gas station and fill up their trucks and their track hose and skid steers, road saws, etc. with fuel. They'd fuel all their own equipment, drive out to the job site, set up traffic control, barricades, cones, signs, flaggers, whatever was necessary. The foreman would call in his own utility locates for underground utility location. Then the crew would saw cut the road. One guy would saw cut the road, and there'd be 4 or 5 guys standing around, watching, waiting until they could actually do some work. Somebody would notify the homeowners and communicate with them when they showed up. Sometimes homeowners were surprised to find out we were out there doing work. If they forgot something, then somebody would run back to the shop or run to the supply house and get what they needed, what they forgot, come back. Meanwhile, half the crew standing around waiting. Then they did all their own restoration work. So after they were done replacing the pipe, replacing the manholes, they would do their own concrete, blacktop, yard restoration. So this 5 or 6 man crew would be out there cleaning up yards, doing asphalt patching, and then they would finish that job and go to the next job. So turnkey operation, lots of inefficiency. They had, out of maybe it was a 3 or 4 day operation, 3 or 4 day project, they actually made money. We actually made money on 1.5 days, maybe 2 days. So they would spend a day of prep work, which we made no money on. There were no billable items completed that day. And then on the restoration side, we had 5 or 6 guys doing restoration, which in a lot of cases there was no revenue as well. So we had 1 or 2 really good days, and then 1 or 2 or 3 non-revenue producing days from that asset. Now that was not good. So here's what we did. That was before. This is after. So I looked at, I took the load shedding approach to this operation, and I cut out every bit of non-revenue producing work as possible from this dig crew. So what that meant was I developed a shop crew and put together some relatively low-cost labor, some unskilled people in the shop, and they would load the equipment, they would fuel the trucks, they would stock material, they would go to the supply house, and they would get the parts that were needed. One of the things I did was I put in bulk fuel tanks at the shop and kept people from going to the gas station, because when they went to the gas station, they had to go in and they would buy cigarettes and they would buy Mountain Dew and they would buy candy bars, sometimes with company credit cards, all the while on the clock, wasting time. So we eliminated that by putting bulk fuel tanks in. We also started to stock. We looked at all the materials that we were using and decided on a list of materials that needed to be stocked at the shop at all times: pipe, fittings, safety equipment, saw blades, etc., and designated one of the people on the shop crew to be responsible for making sure that stuff was stocked in the shop at all times. We created what we called the store, the general store. The idea was when guys came in the morning, they could grab stuff out of the store, consumables that they needed. They would always have the tools that they needed. They had the pipe and the fittings and the parts that they needed. And the idea was to keep those guys out of the supply house. If anybody was going to go to the supply house, it was going to be my $16 an hour shop guy, and it wasn't going to be two prevailing wage employees who were making $35, $40 an hour. Pretty easy math there. So I delegated all of the shop-related non-revenue producing work onto a shop crew, and all the material procurement was pushed off onto the shop crew. Next, I eliminated the prep and the cleanup from this pipe crew, and I set up a cleanup crew. So the idea was the cleanup crew or the prep crew would go in, they would saw cut the road, and they would get everything set up so that when the dig crew hit the job site, they could start digging and get to work immediately. And then the dig crew would leave when they were done, and the cleanup crew would come back in and do all the yard restoration. Now, why did I do that? Because it takes a lot less skill to do yard restoration. I can hire somebody pretty inexperienced and a little bit less expensive to do yard restoration, and as opposed to having my experienced pipe fitters and equipment operators doing that sort of thing. So we got to the point where the dig crew would show up at a job site, the road was cut, traffic control was set up, they did their work, they moved on to the next job site, which was already prepped for them, and the restoration crew came in and cleaned up behind them. I also automated quite a bit. I mentioned T-sheets. We eliminated a lot of the craziness that was going on with time tracking by using T-sheets for time tracking. That was a huge benefit. Also, I equipped the superintendent to do a lot of the upfront planning, a lot of the upfront scheduling, a lot of the upfront communication. Had the office staff do the underground locates. And in our state, those could be done online, which streamlined things quite a bit. And that also helped us to keep track of all the locates that have been called in to make sure that they had in fact been called in. Another thing that I did I'm not sure where this falls, but it turned out to be a really helpful tool. Previously, somebody, the supervisor would schedule the work, order all the material, figure out which equipment was needed, all the tools, and then send it out there, and then the foreman in the field would sort of pick through it and kind of figure out what worked, and then they would realize, well, I'd rather have this piece of equipment, or I'd rather have this tool, or this particular part was missing. So made a subtle change in the way it went from planning to execution. And after this change, the superintendent would schedule the work and provide the work order to the guys, to the crew foreman, and say, this is what you're going to do. Here's where you're going to be. Here's when it needs to be done. Now, Mr. Crew Foreman, you figure out what you need. You come up with the plan. You go order your materials from the shop foreman. You tell the shop foreman what equipment you're going to need, and you work out the details. Now, that's a subtle shift, but what happens is when the crew foreman was given a plan and given a material and equipment list, then they didn't own it. There was this tendency to shoot holes in it because it wasn't their plan, and whoever put the plan together was thinking about it in a different way than the crew foreman would. Now, when the crew foreman would put together his own plan and order his own materials and his own equipment, two things happened. One, he knew how he was going to build the job, and therefore he ordered the material and equipment accordingly to fit the way he was thinking. And the second thing was, this is the subtle psychological shift, when the crew foreman came up with their own plan, then they would overcome obstacles more so than if someone had given them the plan, because it was their plan. It was their plan that they developed. They owned it, and they were vested in it, and they were much more likely to overcome obstacles and work through it to make it successful. That was tremendous. I'm not sure how to measure that, but if you want to find out more about that, I posted a TED Talk on my website. If you go to constructionleadingedge.com/motivation, you can find out more about the psychology of motivation and how that works. Okay, so to recap, we've talked about load shedding, demand management, peak demand management. So to recap, the steps in this are to, 1, eliminate the waste. 2, look at load shedding. Find your key revenue producers, get rid of all the stuff that needs to be eliminated, automate the stuff that needs to be automated, delegate the stuff that can be delegated so that they're spending as much time as possible doing revenue producing work. Then look at your demand management on how you're going to stage your resources from project to project to project or task to task so that there's as little downtime as possible between those items. So those are some quick hitting things you can do to help if you're experiencing a skilled labor shortage. Now, if you want to, I talked to some folks and they're like, they're extremely appreciative for the podcast. So if you enjoy this podcast and you'd like to help out, you'd like to support what I'm doing here, there's an opportunity to do that. You can go to constructionleadingedge.com/support, and there you'll find some different ways that you can support what's going on at the Construction Leading Edge. If you want to watch that webinar that I talked about where I did a deeper dive into some of these strategies, you can go to constructionleadingedge.com/cashflow and sign up there. The webinar's free, and it's about 45 minutes of all kinds of goodness. I've gotten a lot of good feedback. It's helped a lot of folks to eliminate some inefficiencies, improve their cash flow. It will not make you jump higher. It will not help you grow your hair longer, but it will help you with your business, I believe. So again, go to constructionleadingedge.com/cashflow for that. And lastly, if you want to join the Construction Leading Edge Nation, get emails from me every once in a while, keep up with what's going on behind the scenes here, you can do that by going to the home page, click on the big green button that says Join the Construction Leading Edge Nation, or I'll say the website one more time, constructionleadingedge.com/nation, and you too can be a Construction Leading Edge Nation member. That is it for today. If you have any questions, comments, good feedback, I don't want to hear bad feedback, quite frankly, send me an email, todd@constructionleadingedge.com, todd@constructionleadingedge.com. That's it for today. Hope this helps. See you next time.